The Utoya Massacre. A day that left 77 people dead, most of them being children and teenagers. A day that left people in Norway and the entire world shocked. The 22nd of July 2011 at 3:25 p.m. it all began, when a bomb went off in Oslo, next to a parliament office. This bomb killed 8 people and injured about 200. But little did they know this was just the beginning. Some even believe that this was a distraction for what was coming next. 5 p.m. on the same day, a man shows up on an island. This island was called Utoya and it hosted a summer camp for teenagers. It was hosted by the Norwegian Labour Party. Around 600 teens were there that day. This man presented himself as a police officer doing a routine check since that bomb had just gone off. 2 instructors met him at the dock and they just wanted to confirm his identity, so they contacted the office on mainland. This is when they started getting suspicious of him and he immediately shot them both. This man was called Anders Breivik, a 32-year-old right-wing extremist, aka not a real police officer. He then made his way to the main camp and rounded up as many of the kids as he could. These kids were under the impression that he was just going to brief them about what had happened in Oslo and just make sure that they were safe on the island. And mind you, he was in a police uniform, like they trusted him. Once Anders had gathered enough kids, he just started firing at all of them. He was trying to kill as many as he possibly could. Some of the kids were able to run and hide and text people letting them know what was going on. It was said that this island was pretty small and that you could walk across it in only 10 minutes. Some kids jumped in the water and tried swimming away, some ran for their lives, some hid, and some of them didn't even have the chance to process it before they were shot. And obviously not all the kids at the camp were at that little meeting, so a lot of them just heard the noises and had no idea what was going on. They knew that something was happening that was bad and that they were shooting, but they had no idea what the context was, who he was. And so he would lure kids out of their hiding spots, being like, "Oh, I'm an officer, I'm here to help you." And once they came out, assuming that they were safe, he would shoot them. It's just pure evil. 47 kids managed to barricade themselves in an abandoned cabin. Anders was using an automatic gun, and these kids in the cabin thought that there was multiple shooters because of how much he was shooting. This is nowhere near the end of the story. Stick around for part 2 to see what happened next. Part 2 of the Utoya Massacre. Back to the 47 kids that locked themselves in the cabin. Those poor kids waited in the cabin for 4 hours. Mind you, some of these kids had seen the shooter already, so they knew he was in a police uniform. And so when the actual police showed up, they were petrified. They thought they were gonna die. It must have been terrifying, but also a relief when they realized they were being saved. The whole mass shooting lasted an hour and a half. 69 kids died and 32 were injured. 2 of the youngest victims were only 14. At the time, this was the biggest attack to happen in Norway since World War II. Now, you're probably wondering how the police didn't get there sooner. It had gone on for an hour and a half. So they knew about the shooting really early on. Apparently, law enforcement didn't have access to a helicopter or any quicker means to getting to the kids. So they just had to make the long journey there. Now, the shooter Anders himself had actually called the police to surrender twice during the shooting. But between the calls, he just kept shooting all the kids. Luckily, there were a lot of campers around the area who actually ended up saving 150 kids altogether. These campers were heroes. They were going back and forth to the island, trying to get kids out of the water, saving them from drowning, and doing their best to get everyone they possibly could to safety. Similar to all those kids that hid in the cabin, when the police did show up, every child on the island was terrified. They weren't sure if they were real or not, or if they could trust them. The kids apparently begged the police to just drop their guns. The police then detained Anders, and the world would learn of the horrific events of that day. They then psychologically examined Anders. They determined that he had paranoid schizophrenia and that he was psychotic during this shooting. He was said to be criminally insane. This next bit kind of confuses me. A year later, they apparently re-examined him, and it was determined that he was actually sane. and so the courts ruled him as sane. This next part will probably infuriate you as much as it did me. Anders was only given 21 years in jail. In my opinion, not enough. This man killed 77 people, 69 of them being children, over politics. The entire event was simply politically motivated. It was also said that he joined a neo-Nazi group in prison. I just pray somehow he never gets out. He doesn't deserve to. Sending all my condolences to the families, and thanks for watching.
My dog has been doing the most terrifying things and I have no idea what to do. Please bear with me. Everyone will probably think I'm crazy, but I couldn't make this up. I hope posting this online will be a good start. My dog Otis is a relatively friendly Belgian Malinois with a tendency to get bitey when he gets nervous. To be honest, I never really liked him. I don't like to talk about it, but I'm sure you can piece together what happened when a clueless toddler and a nervous Belgian Malinois mix. I've had a scar ever since. A few weeks ago, my parents left me alone with just Otis and a few packs of ramen noodle cups to keep me company. I had my own phone, so I didn't care. I decided to get out my laptop and do a little gaming while I had the opportunity, and I heated up a fresh cup of noodles to eat. It was nice to have a little downtime to myself, and that was when I noticed it for the first time. As I booted up the game in the deafening quiet of a relatively empty house, I heard it. "You are alone." It sent chills up my spine. It was raspy and hard to understand, sort of quiet at the same time. It came from directly behind me. I ripped the headphones off my ears and turned to look behind me in a panic flurry. "Who's there?" I asked. No response, just silence, spare the shaky sound of my panicked breaths. The only thing I could see was my dog, staring at me with those dead eyes of his. Did I imagine it? I didn't think so. "Otis, did you just talk to me?" I asked. I felt dumb saying it, but I couldn't help but try. As I expected, no response. My day was ruined. I pulled out my phone to text my mom about it before I heard it again. I say hello. This time it was quieter, but a little more clear. I looked back at Otis to see he was standing on his hind legs with his chest puffed out, like a deer with chronic waist syndrome. It was terrifying. His eyes were directly on mine, and he slowly sauntered towards with great difficulty. "What the hell, Otis?" I yelled, scrambling backwards off the couch. I was stunned. I knew there was no one I could tell. I had no evidence, no footage. They would think I was crazy. I would too. If someone came up to me and told me their dog talked to them while standing on its hind legs. It took me a while to go and check where Otis was. I was afraid. I sat in the living room unable to do anything but look around and check for signs of life. I decided I was going to text my mom a vague call for help by just telling her she needed to come home and that I would explain later. I knew she wouldn't believe it if I told her Otis was talking to me and walking around like a human, so I waited. I eventually built up the courage to walk downstairs to check where Otis was. I slowly walked down the steps, each creak in the old wood making me slightly more afraid. And what I saw was the most harrowing thing I'll ever see. Otis popped his head from above the doorway and hung upside down, staring at me right in the eye with an uncanny little toothy grin. And he just hung there staring at me, and I didn't even scream. I just stared right back, unable to move, unable to think. And he said one thing and one thing only, and I will never forget it, not until the day I die. He said, "No one will believe you."
This story is why you should never mess with the Ouija boards. We moved into my dad's girlfriend's house where one of her daughters lived upstairs, my brother lived upstairs, her other daughter lived down in the basement, along with me who lived in a makeshift room in the basement. One night, me and her two daughters decided to buy an Ouija board. After my dad and his girlfriend went to bed, me and her daughters all went downstairs, grabbed a bunch of candles, set up the Ouija board, and grabbed a bunch of our great-grandparents' stuff. We wanted to see if any of our great-grandparents would talk to us. We were so excited because the Ouija board was working and things were moving it. We asked what the spirit's name was, expecting it to be one of our great-grandparents, but it said its name was Tick. T-I-C. We asked it to repeat it again, and it spelled out T-I-C. We knew that it wasn't one of our great-grandparents. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of why you should never do an Ouija board. So after it said its name was Tick, we asked how old it was. The spirit responded with 9 years old. We asked what gender it was. There was no response. We knew for sure at this point we were not talking to one of our great-grandparents. I wanted to stop right then and there. I was really freaked out and I knew that we weren't talking to something good, but my older stepsister wanted to keep going. So out of peer pressure, of course, I kept going. She asked if it was human. Its response was no. We asked if we were safe. The spirit said yes, but I really didn't feel safe. We asked if the spirit was stuck in the house. The response was yes. The next thing my older stepsister asked, which I really wish she didn't, is if Tick was the only one there with us. The response was no. 60 seconds is not enough time for the story, and the story is really long, so stay tuned for part 3. This is part 3 to the Ouija board story, and why you should never use an Ouija board. So my older stepsister asked if Tick was the only one there with us. The answer was no. She asked if all the spirits there with us were good spirits. The Ouija board said no. Right as we asked that, the bathroom was right behind us, and we heard a huge loud slam in the bathroom. All of us were really freaked out, just sitting there not knowing what to do. The candle started flickering. There was so much tension in the room. I have never felt anything like it. That is when my other stepsister screamed at the top of her lungs and told me to move. She saw a black hand approaching from behind me and was gonna grab my face. Because she screamed so loud, my dad woke up and we heard him, so we said goodbye really quickly. I went upstairs really quick to calm my dad down and say everything was fine. But after that night, we awoke something and a lot more things happened. Stay tuned for part 4. This is part 4 of the Ouija board. So after we used the Ouija board, we definitely awoke something in the house. The energy downstairs was so intense that none of us could sleep down there. Because of this, me and my older stepsister slept upstairs for literally weeks. Remember the shadow of the hand that wrapped around my face in part 3? Well, that hand didn't disappear. My stepmom said she saw it multiple times when she would go downstairs and change the laundry. It got to the point where her and my dad didn't even want to go downstairs. The cat would chase things that weren't even there. Doors would slam. Floorboards would creak at night. My dad would constantly see my cat chasing a figure, and all you could see was the figure's spine. It would run on all fours. The hauntings got so bad that my dad decided that we needed to move out. Ever since then, nobody has lived in that house for longer than 2 months.
This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 1. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in Kansas. Both my parents were out and I was home alone with my 2 dogs. I was sitting in my bedroom playing on my computer when I heard the very distinct sound of the front door open and close, like someone had just come in. My dogs got up and ran into the living room, and so I just assumed my parents were home. I shouted for my mum to confirm this and heard no response. I paused my game and walked out into the living room to see, and as I did, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had heard someone come in, clear as day, but no one was there. I wasn't wearing headphones and I'd had the computer volume turned down, so I knew it couldn't have been the game. I tried calling my parents, but neither of them picked up, so for the first time in my life, I called the police. This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 2. I explained the situation to the 911 operator, and she told me that police were on their way. I stood there rooted to the spot, and not long after my parents got home. The police arrived shortly after, and told us that thieves usually wait until homeowners leave, check the door, and if it's unlocked, they go in and take valuables. They checked the house, but found no one. They said whoever it was probably left when they heard that someone was home. They told us to make sure that we lock the doors, but not to worry too much. Not long after it happened, I told the story to one of my friends, and he said, "You only heard the door once. That means they were most likely already in the house. You just heard them leave."